Okay, let's unpack this. If you had to name the biggest superstar in ancient Rome, you might pick an emperor or maybe a great general.
Sure.
But the truth is, the biggest celebrities were the gladiators, the men who fought for their lives in the arena.
It's a profound contradiction.
Yeah.
These were men who legally were property.
Right.
Most were enslaved people, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, standing at the very bottom of Roman society.
Yet when they stepped into the Colosseum, they were treated like rock stars.
Exactly.
Our mission today is to analyze what that brutal, paradoxical life was actually like. We're looking at who these fighters were, how their grueling training was managed as a business, and what it took for one of these outcasts to win not less a battle, but a shot at freedom.
To understand their status, you really have to look at the origins. The fights didn't start as, public entertainment.
Oh, right. They were for funerals initially.
Exactly. They were solemn rituals
Yeah.
intended to honor the dead. But as Rome grew wealthier, these rituals became massive public spectacles.
And the recruitment for them was harsh. If you were a prisoner captured during Rome's expansion or a person condemned for a crime, you could be sold directly into it.
Your path was pretty much chosen for you.
But I've heard that not everyone was forced into the life.
That's the really surprising part. No, there was a small group of free men who voluntarily signed up.
Why would anyone do that?
Usually desperation. They were desperate for money, or maybe they just craved the fame that came with winning.
But whether you volunteered or were captured, the legal result was the same, wasn't it?
The same. You ceased to be a full citizen. Once you were enrolled, you basically sold yourself into slavery, giving up your rights and becoming the absolute property of your owner.
And that status determined everything.
Everything about their day-to-day life. Despite the fame, they lived in heavily guarded barracks like prisoners, constantly watched.
Because they were dangerous, but also because they were valuable assets.
Very expensive assets.
Yeah.
So the Romans treated them that way, locked up for security, but treated well for business.
Speaking of the barracks, these training centers, the Ludus, were huge.
Massive complexes. The most famous, the Ludus Magnus, was located right next to the Colosseum in Rome.
So not a long commute on game day.
No, not at all.
And life inside was just this intense, strict schedule.
Completely restrictive. It was all about physical conditioning. It wasn't about leisure. It was about maximizing the fighter's value.
And to do that, you have to feed them right. Now get this. The diet isn't what I expected.
No, it's not the high-protein diet of a modern athlete.
They got 3 big meals a day, but it was mostly barley, beans, and dried fruit.
This is a great insight into ancient athletic science. The Roman nickname for gladiators was actually horderi.
Which means barley eaters.
Barley eaters, exactly. They ate this high-carb, mostly vegetarian diet on purpose.
Why? What was the advantage?
It helped them build a layer of subcutaneous fat, and that fat, paradoxically, protected the vital organs from shallow cuts.
So they could take more hits without being taken out of the fight immediately.
Precisely. It was a diet designed for survival, not necessarily for speed.
And the discipline to enforce all this was, I'm guessing, severe.
Incredibly severe. Rule breaking was met with harsh punishment because, again, these fighters represented a huge investment.
And the guy running this whole business was the lanista.
Yes, the professional manager. He's the one who bought, fed, and trained the gladiators. He was managing the entire supply chain for the games.
So a coach, a warden, and a businessman all rolled into one.
And a very shrewd one. The lanista negotiated all the contracts, renting out his men for profit.
And what if one of them died in the arena?
Then the host of the games had to pay the lanista a massive fee as compensation. It was basically a life insurance policy for the owner.
That system really just highlights their status as assets, high-value property. It makes sense then that their training was so methodical.
It was brutal repetition. Beginners would spend most of their time working with wooden weapons against a tall, fixed post. It was called the palace.
So they could practice strikes and footwork without hurting each other.
Exactly. They'd practice those movements until they were flawless, automatic. It wasn't just about strength. It was about efficiency. And believe it or not, grace.
They didn't want brawlers.
No, fighting like a wild brawler would get you killed very quickly. They practiced thousands of repetitions until it was all muscle memory. Only then would they move on to sparring with other students.
Okay, so here's where we hit that central contradiction again. If these men were social outcasts and, treated so brutally, you'd think their healthcare would be terrible.
But it was the complete opposite.
The medical paradox.
Yes. Gladiators received specialized, high-quality medical care. far superior to what the average Roman citizen could ever afford.
Again, it's a business decision.
It's all about the bottom line. Losing an expensive, highly trained fighter to a simple infection was just bad for business.
So the Ludi had their own top-tier medical facilities on site.
They did. Doctors were always available. We know they got regular massages and hot baths, not for luxury, but to keep their muscles flexible.
And what about for serious injuries?
For advanced treatments, deep wounds were carefully stitched with fine thread and treated with vinegar, which acted as an ancient antiseptic. It cut down the risk of fatal infection dramatically.
And I've read about this bizarre drink they had.
The ash tonic, yes. After a fight or intense training, they would drink a tonic made from wood ashes and crushed burnt bones.
Which sounds awful.
It probably was. But modern analysis suggests it provided a massive dose of calcium and other minerals. It helped their bodies recover from fractures and all that physical stress.
It's just wild. Their owners were keeping them in peak condition because that's where the money was.
Which turns the arena fights into less random violence and more of a high-stakes corporate competition.
Let's talk about the different fighting styles. The audience wanted a good show, so gladiators were put into different classes.
Right, based on their gear. And they were always matched against fighters with contrasting strengths and weaknesses.
To make it unpredictable.
Exactly. You might pair a fast, light fighter against a slow, heavily armored one.
Like the Murmillo. He was a heavy fighter.
Very heavy. A big rectangular shield in the gladius. That short, 2-foot-long sword made for thrusting up close.
And you might put him up against, say, the Retiarius.
The classic matchup. The Retiarius was the light fighter. He went into the arena with almost no armor.
What were his weapons?
A large weighted net he'd try to throw over his opponent, and a 3-pronged spear, a trident.
So you've got brute force versus speed and strategy.
And the crowd loved that drama. Then you had other types, like the Thraex, who carried a small round shield and a curved blade.
Designed to get around an opponent's shield?
Right, to hook behind it or cut at exposed limbs. The equipment itself was heavy bronze and iron, and the helmets were decorated with feathers or horsehair to be intimidating.
But the armor wasn't complete. They left parts of the body exposed on purpose.
They did.
Oh.
You might have a guard on your sword arm or your lead leg, but many key areas were left open. This ensured that despite the investment, the fight stayed dangerous and kept the crowd on the edge of their seats.
So all that preparation leads to the grand games themselves. Walk us through what game day was like.
It was the ultimate spectacle. The day would start with a grand procession, the Pompa. The gladiators would march into the arena in their most decorative, expensive armor.
Showing off.
Absolutely. The stadium was roaring with thousands of people. There was music from trumpets and these massive water-powered organs.
And the main fights didn't happen right away.
No, the prelude was often animal hunts in the morning or even public executions. The gladiators waited, preparing mentally, before they stepped out onto the arena floor.
Which was covered in sand. The arena.
A thick layer of it, yeah. It was designed to absorb blood and water and make sure the fighters had good, stable footing.
Once the battle started, was it just a chaotic brawl?
Not at all. It was structured combat. They were expected to show immense skill and courage. A referee was always there to enforce the rules.
And here's the critical point that I think most movies get wrong. The fights were not automatically to the death.
Generally, no, they weren't. Because again, these men were valuable property. The lanista did not want to lose a high-earning asset if he could avoid it.
So what happened if a fighter was wounded or just too exhausted to go on?
He could raise one finger. The signal was called ad digitum, to ask for mercy.
And at that point, his fate was in the hands of the crowd.
Exactly. The crowd and ultimately the person who organized the games, the editor, would decide. If the gladiator had fought bravely, shown real skill, he might be spared to fight another day.
But if you won, you became a legend. Winning bought you a kind of fame that just transcended your enslaved status.
You were an instant celebrity. Winners had their names scrawled in graffiti all over Roman cities. Kids played with little clay action figures of them. High society idolized them.
So for these outcasts, the arena was really the only way they could get a public identity.
It was the only way. And the rewards were real. Victors got palm branches, silver dishes, and prize money. Sometimes enough to buy themselves some comforts.
But the real prize, the ultimate goal, wasn't the money.
No. It was survival. And that long, difficult path toward independence.
Which was symbolized by the wooden sword, the Ludus.
The Ludus. If a gladiator performed exceptionally well over many years, survived dozens of fights, he might eventually be awarded one.
And that was his ticket out.
It symbolized that he was a free man, no longer required to fight.
That must have been an incredibly rare thing to see.
Extremely rare. A freed gladiator regained his legal status as a citizen. He could become a trainer, start a new career, have a family. But the hard reality is that the vast majority of fighters just didn't live long enough to earn that independence.
That constant violent struggle was the engine of Roman entertainment for centuries. But it did eventually come to an end.
It did. The games continued well into the late Roman Empire, but social values began to shift. The rise of new religions that condemned the violence was part of it.
And it was just getting too expensive.
That was the more practical reason. The massive cost of organizing the events and maintaining the schools became unsustainable for a struggling empire.
The violence just wasn't profitable anymore.
So ultimately, the games were officially banned. The training schools closed. The remaining fighters were absorbed into the army or other jobs, and now the Colosseum stands as a monument to their struggle.
So what's the big takeaway from the life of a gladiator?
I think the most surprising insight is that pairing of total dehumanization with total worship. Gladiators teach us that even in the most controlling systems, where a person is legally considered property, discipline, skill, and sheer bravery, could temporarily turn an outcast into a superstar. It was a desperate path to a life they were otherwise forbidden to claim.
Understanding the meticulous business behind their training, the science of their diet, and just how rare it was to earn that wooden sword, the Ludus, is crucial to understanding the complex values of ancient Rome. Good luck with your studies.